And so this is part number 4 of a series that we've been in together called Ministry Leaders. We've been fasting and praying as a church, asking God to raise up leaders that will coordinate ministry efforts moving forward. We looked at Acts chapter 6 and we saw a model for the way the early church coordinated ministry. Last week we saw the different types of ministry leaders and the type of character and behavior traits they should possess from 1 Timothy 3. And this morning in part 4, we're going to look at a ministry leader's process. And here's the way I would introduce the sermon this morning. In your life, personally, in the job where you work, in any organization or even a church, every system is perfectly designed for the results that it is getting. And so if you're not happy with the results you're seeing in your life or at your job or in a church, you need to redesign the system if you want different kinds of results. Now, the pandemic has presented some enormous challenges. But I'll tell you one thing, if we can find a silver lining at all to this period of slowed pace in the life of churches, for those that would take advantage of it, it provided us a great opportunity. And that opportunity is this: a chance to reevaluate everything that we do as a church from the ground up, and to redesign the system for better results moving forward. You need to know that your leadership here at Northside, the shepherds, the ministers, and the staff, have been spending considerable time together over the last 2 years in prayer and in seeking God's wisdom. And then in putting our collective wisdom and judgment together to think, what do we want to see ministry be and look like moving forward as we emerge into a brighter day? So today, brothers and sisters, begins a new day in the life of the ministry efforts of the Northside Church. And we start by the raising up of ministry leaders. But what types of ministry leaders do we want to see God raise up here among us? And how should those ministry leaders be selected? Well, I think the best place to start in trying to answer some of those questions is the place where we should always start. And that is, let's look at Jesus. Jesus is the best example. He provides for us the best model of what a ministry leader, what a servant serving in the kingdom should look like. So this morning, as we look at ministry leaders' process, I got 3 points I want us to explore together. In the first place, let's look to Jesus. Let's look to Christ's pathway for what a ministry servant, someone leading ministry efforts and serving, using their gifts and talents to serve the work of the kingdom. What should that person look like? Secondly, we're going to get more specific at the process that we want to begin to implement here at Northside for our ministry. And then finally, what is the ministry leader's persona? What kind of attitude or behavior should characterize a ministry leader? So let's look at each one of those in turn. First, Christ's pathway. Jesus blazes the trail. He blazes and cuts the path for you and me about what it truly means to be a ministry leader. Let's look at the text, Bill. Philippians 2. We're going back there. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Different translations render this different ways. Have the same mind in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. Have the same attitude that Christ had toward each other. Brothers and sisters, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, if we're going to have an impact in our community and in the world for His cause, before we think about what we're going to do, we need to make sure that we come at it with the attitude and mind of Jesus. We've got to make sure that we have the same mindset, all of us, toward each other and toward those that we're trying to serve and those we're trying to reach with the message of Christ. Well, what kind of mindset? What kind of attitude? What kind of behavior or setting of the mind did Jesus have? Verse number 6 says that Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider his equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Some translations will put it this way: he didn't consider the fact that he was equal with God something to be held on to, something to be used for his own purposes, something to be grasped onto. What does this teach us about what it means to be a servant? When you look at what Jesus did, although he had every gift, hear me now, he had every gift. In him was the fullness of every imaginable spiritual gift. Although he had every right to exercise that gift in his ministry toward humanity, he did not consider that something to be used to elevate himself. So what it means to be a servant means giving up your rights for others. You may say, well, I have the right to this or the right to that, or God has given me this and he expects me to use it. Wait a minute. Before you go there, you need to check yourself and say, do I have the mindset of Jesus? Am I willing to have the heart he had to give up my rights for the sake of others? And then in verse number 7, rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He is the creator. John tells us in John chapter 1, there was nothing that was made that wasn't made by him, through him, and for him. Jesus is the creator. And yet, the Creator was willing to humble himself to the point that he would put himself underneath all of creation to serve us. He didn't just come to rule over us. He said, let me show you what it truly means to be great. I will come and lower myself underneath you and become a servant, being made in the likeness of human flesh. What does that mean to be a servant? If we're going to be ministry leaders like Jesus, what does that mean? It means that you become less so others can become more. It's not about you. It's not about, well, I hope the church recognizes my gifts. What is best may be that mean that you take a back seat. Because if you have the mind of Jesus, you will empty yourself of pride. You will put others first. Because listen, church, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Verse number 8. Jesus, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Being a servant means that you don't just give up your rights for others and become less so that others can become more, but it does also mean that you're obedient to what God is calling you to do. Jesus was obedient to the point that he said, when the Father said, I need you to go down there and do this mission for me, Jesus was willing to obey the call of God to the point that he would die to self to see that happen. Well, let that sink in. A ministry leader will listen to the call of God, even if it means death to self. humbling yourself, putting others before yourself. I want to speak to all of us here in this moment and say we need to not quickly dismiss the call of God. You say, how do I know that God is calling me? Well, if many people begin to encourage you, if you hear many people speaking into your life saying, I see this in you, and I believe God has this for you, and you hear the encouragement of, I think you would be great to help the church move forward in this area, don't quickly dismiss that. Yes, be humble. Yes, put the needs of others before yourself. Don't exalt yourself. But listen carefully to what God may be saying through other people, because He may be calling you to something. And to have the mind of Jesus is to be obedient to the call of God. Verse number 9. Therefore, God, because Jesus did this, God exalted Him to the highest place and gave Him a name that is above every name. What does being a servant mean? When you follow the mindset of Jesus, it means that God is the one who does the elevating. You don't elevate yourself. That is not the mind of Christ. You let God be the one to elevate you. When talking about these ministry leaders, these diakonoi of 1 Timothy chapter 3 that we looked at last week, in verse 13, the text says that those who have served well as a diakonoi have gained an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. What is that saying? It's saying God recognizes when you and I position ourselves humbly to say, Lord, it's not about me. It's not about me elevating or exalting myself. It's about me saying, Lord, I will listen to your call and I'll do what you're calling me to do. And here am I, Lord, send me, but send me in a way that what I do glorifies not me, but glorifies you. And whenever that happens, God recognizes that. Church, if you sense that someone is trying to elevate themselves, they're not somebody we want to nominate to be a ministry leader. Because the heart of Christ is not about elevating ourselves. It's letting God be the one to do the elevating. So, that's the pathway of Christ. But what is Northside's process? How are we going to move forward practically in seeing this take place? Well, we have identified our needs as a church and outlined a process for ministry. The best way to start if we're going to move forward in ministry is to say, Lord, who is it that you're raising up? Who are the people that have the mind of Christ, that are following the pathway of Christ? But more than just first identifying people and then saying, here, we're going to give them a task, we say, no, we start with what the need is first. Like the Acts 6 model gives us. What is the need? So what I want to do now is I want to outline for you the ministry areas that at Northside that we currently have prayed over as leaders and identified the areas we want to focus in on to try to be as effective as possible as a church for the mission Christ has given us. So I want to share with you some areas that currently have ministry leadership over them. We have 12 filled areas that already have ministry leadership, but we have 10 areas that are vacant of ministry leadership. And these are the areas I want to focus in on and show you that we need to be praying and fasting and asking God to raise up leaders. And we want to ask the church to nominate through prayer and fasting people that you believe have the character of Christ and are suited especially to be, that are equipped to lead in these areas. But first, the 12 areas that we have that are filled. Let me just quickly share those with you. We have the area of the audio-visual booth. We've got Carrie Wyatt and Taylor Atkins that are working along with help with Lenny Whitefield and others that come alongside of them that are helping in that ministry area. Budget and finance, Charlie Hooks. Children's ministry, Megan Swanner. Counseling services that we're anxious to get started, John Kennedy. Discipleship training, yours truly. Discipleship mentoring with CSDN is Major Clay. Discipleship mentoring with T-POM is Jim Pounders. The food pantry, Laura Sellers. Meal ministry, Deborah Flowers. Our safety team, Brian Eaton. Our worship team, Kenny Wyatt. And our youth group, Chris Gannon. I'd like us to recognize all of these ministry leaders and tell them how thankful we are. We appreciate so much your willingness to be so diligent in serving so faithfully to lead these particular areas of ministry. Many of them have been doing it for quite some time, and we are so thankful for their work. But I want to now move to the 10 areas that we need ministry leadership over. These areas would include building maintenance, benevolent ministry, fellowship events, grounds upkeep, guest services, that is our greeter type ministry, handyman ministry, life groups, prayer ministry, our transportation team, and widows and those confined to their home ministry. These are the areas that we currently want to see flourish, but we don't have ministry leadership over those areas. And so these are the specific areas we want you to be praying and fasting over and asking God to lead you to the names that you would like to, as a congregation, nominate for potential leadership over these areas. Now, you might have questions about the specifics of what these areas involve. I'm going to give you a sheet in just a moment that will outline what those specific areas are, but those are the 10. So, we're going to recognize ministry leaders with an intentional process. Let me tell you what the process will be. In the first place, following the Acts chapter 6 model, where the apostles told the congregation, choose you from among yourselves, we're asking the church to do that. Toward the end of the sermon this morning, we're going to distribute a nomination form that has all of the 10 areas I just mentioned with descriptions of what those areas involve. And we're going to ask you to not immediately do this, but we want to ask you to prayerfully ask God to give you the names of people that you believe God is putting on your heart to nominate for areas of leadership over those ministries. So we're asking the congregation to nominate them. We're going to give you 2 weeks to nominate those areas. After those nominations come in, after 2 weeks, the elders have empowered the ministry staff to do the heavy lifting of processing all of those nominations and contacting the individuals that were nominated and to evaluate their fit, because as the ministry staff, we are on the tip of the spear of what the needs are for those ministries. And so we're going to try to evaluate fit for ministry leadership specifically in relationship to the people that have been nominated. And then the ministry staff, after processing and communicating with all of the nominees, will then make recommendations of the people we believe among the nominees that are best suited through their gifting and through the amount of nominations they've received to be the ones that we recommend to the elders. And the elders will then contact those individual nominees and then go through the approval process and then the appointment process of leaders in those areas. So that's kind of gives you an idea of we're trying to be very intentional about the way that we go about this nomination of ministry leaders. So now let me move to the third area, and that is, what kind of persona do we want to see ministry leaders have? That we're looking for a certain kind of people to lead in ministry. And what kind of people are we looking for? We're looking in the first place for the fact that a ministry leader must be a proven servant. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 20 and verse number 26, he said, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. So what is Jesus saying there? He is saying that in his kingdom, The people that we're looking for that are best equipped to be leaders of ministry are not those people necessarily that are the successful people according to the world's standards, but instead they are the people that have positioned themselves to have, as we've already explored, the mind of Christ, the humility of Christ. And they've already been doing the work that we're asking them to lead. You see, we don't just nominate people and say, well, they hadn't been doing any of this in the church, so we're just going to give them that task. No. We want to look among ourselves and say the ones we want to appoint as ministry leaders are people that have already been serving in some capacity in this way. I think that's what Paul is getting at in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 10 when he's talking about the diakonoi, and he says they must first be tested. They must first be tested. In other words, the church needs to be looking and seeing who among us has already been demonstrating by their life and by their sacrificial service. They've already been demonstrating that they're a proven servant. So that's what we're looking for in the first place. Secondly, we're looking for people that are reliable. We need people that are they've demonstrated their servants, but they also need to have demonstrated that they are reliable people we can count on. This week, as I read back over the character traits that Paul gives for ministry leaders in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 8 through 13 that we looked at last week, listen to it again. I'm going to share with you all the traits that he describes. And see if you can notice a common theme with all of these characteristics. They must be well respected. They must have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers. They must not be dishonest with money. They must be committed to the faith. They must not slander or gossip about people. They must show self-control. They must be faithful to their spouse if they're married. And they must manage their household well if they have children. To me, all of these characteristics have everything to do with demonstrating that they are reliable people, that you can trust them, that you respect the fact that they have demonstrated by the behavior of their life that they are people that you can count on. So we're looking for people that are proven servants, people that are reliable, and then finally, they should be people that are suited to the specific task. In Romans chapter 12, the Apostle Paul talks about the different gifts that God has distributed among the church. And in those descriptions of the various gifts, he says something very insightful. In verse number 6, Romans 12, he says, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. We don't all have the same gifts. We don't all have the same talents or skill sets. And that is on purpose by God's design. God has intentionally given all of us different gifts for doing certain things well. You can do certain things well that I can't do very well, and perhaps there are things that I can do well that you are not especially gifted in. And so God, in His amazing wisdom, knew that not only would the church be more effective with a diversity of gifts that He would give men and women in the church of His Son and our Lord Jesus Christ, but He knew that not only would we be more effective, He knew that it would bring us together in unity when we recognized the fact that each of us have something to offer, and we're interdependent upon one another's contributions. The church is not effective if we all have the same gift. The church is effective when we have a variety of gifts, and that's the way God planned it. And so, as such, not every person should be not certain individuals shouldn't be appointed to certain areas of ministry leadership if they have not been given that specific skill set or gift. So as we're thinking about and praying over, God, show us over these 10 areas where we need ministry leadership at Northside, who are the individuals that you have gifted with specific skill sets and talents in those specific areas, and they've already been demonstrating a willingness to use those gifts because they've already proven themselves to have a servant heart and mentality, and they've also demonstrated we can count on them. They're reliable people. That's the kind of individuals that we're looking for as far as ministry leaders are concerned. So here, as we kind of wrap up here, you see on the screen a copy of the ministry leaders form. I've got those copies up here. I'm going to have some folks distribute those in just a moment. So Dustin, if I could get your help, and who else can I pick on? Avery, could I get your help? And let's see over here, Chris, could I get your help? So I'm going to have these guys distribute these forms, and you'll see on the sheet kind of a description of what I've talked about this morning and what we're looking for. And then you'll see descriptions of the 10 areas that are vacant for ministry leaders. And we're asking you, again, to pray diligently over these areas. And we're asking you to consider the area of need. Consider people who are suited to the task specifically and have the spiritual traits of reliability that are mentioned in 1 Timothy 3 that you see there listed on the sheet. And we're asking you, and by the way, at the bottom of the backside, we've got the current ministry areas that we already, again, are so thankful that we already have ministry leadership over. We're asking you to nominate from either 1, 2, or as many, no more than 3 individuals for every particular area. You see, in Acts chapter 6, they nominated and appointed 7 individuals just to see over the ministry of widows, because it was a task that required more than a singular ministry leader. Some of the areas, as we move forward, we will appoint individuals because one individual would be enough over that area. In some other areas, we may appoint a multiplicity of individuals over that area. But what we're asking you to do is to, from your knowledge of the people of this church and through prayer, to nominate up to 3 people in every area that we will consider and take through our intentional process of vetting and communicating with the nominees for consideration of leadership in these areas. Now, we're going to take these nominations for the next 2 weeks until March the 13th. So you can turn those in as early as today, giving the fact that you have prayed over it. And then for the next 2 weeks up till March the 13th is when we'll be taking these forms. So we are, the leaders are extremely optimistic of what we are seeing happening that God is doing in the life of the church here at Northside. And we're excited to say that we believe that God is moving and positioning us to be as effective as a church as we have ever been. But we, again, need everybody to be all in, and we need your help in seeing us move forward in these areas of ministry.